A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, Book the Second, The Golden Thread, Chapter 15, Knitting. There had been earlier drinking than usual in the wine shop of Monsieur Defarge. As early as 6 o'clock in the morning, sallow faces, peeping through its barred windows, had descried other faces within, bending over measures of wine. Monsieur Defarge sold a very thin wine at the best of times, but it would seem to have been an unusually thin wine that he sold this time, a sour wine, moreover, or a souring for its influence on the mood of those who drank it, and was to make them gloomy. No vivacious bacchanalian flame leaped out of the pressed grape of Monsieur Defarge, but a smouldering fire that burnt in the dark lay hidden in the dregs of it. This had been the third morning in succession on which there had been early drinking at the wine shop of Monsieur Defarge. It had begun on Monday, and here was Wednesday come. There had been more of early brooding than drinking, for many men had listened and whispered and slunk about there from the time of the opening of the door, who could not have laid a piece of money on the counter to save their souls. These were, to the full, as interested in the place, however, as if they could have commanded whole barrels of wine. And they glided from seat to seat, and from counter to counter, swallowing talk in lieu of drink with greedy looks. Notwithstanding an unusual flow of company, the master of the wine shop was not visible. He was not missed, for nobody who crossed the threshold looked for him. Nobody asked for him. Nobody wondered to see only Madame Defarge in her seat, presiding over the distribution of wine, with a bowl of battered small coins before her, as much defaced and beaten out of their original impress as the small coinage of humanity from whose ragged pockets they had come. A suspended interest and a prevalent absence of mind were perhaps observed by the spies who looked in at the wine shop, as they looked in at every place, high and low, from the king's palace to the criminal's gaol. Games at cards languished, players at dominoes musingly built towers with them, drinkers drew figures on the tables, with spilt drops of wine. Madame Defarge herself picked out the pattern on her sleeve with her toothpick, and saw and heard something inaudible and invisible a long way off. Thus, Saint Antoine, in this Venus feature of him, until midday. It was high noontide, when two dusty men passed through his streets and under his swinging lamps, of whom one was Monsieur Defarge, the other a mender of roads in a blue cap, all a dust and a thirst. The two entered the wine shop. Their arrival had lighted a kind of fire in the breast of Saint Antoine, fast spreading as they came along, which stirred and flickered in flames of faces at most doors and windows, yet no one had followed them, and no man spoke when they entered the wine shop, though the eyes of every man there were turned upon them. "Good day, gentlemen," said Monsieur Defarge. It must have been a signal for the loosening of the general tongue. It elicited an answering chorus of "Good day!" "It is bad weather, gentlemen," said Defarge, shaking his head, upon which every man looked at his neighbor, and then all cast down their eyes and sat silent, except one man, who got up and went out. "My wife," said Defarge, addressing Madame Defarge, "I have travelled certain leagues with this good mender of roads called Jacques. I met him by accident a day and a half's journey out of Paris. He is a good child, this mender of roads called Jacques. Give him to drink, my wife." A second man got up and went out. Madame Defarge set wine before the mender of roads called Jacques, who doffed his blue cap to the company and drank. In the breast of his blouse he carried some coarse dark bread. He ate this between whiles, and sat munching and drinking near Madame Defarge's counter. A third man got up and went out. Defarge refreshed himself with a draught of wine, but he took less than was given to the stranger, as being himself a man to whom it was no rarity, and stood waiting until the countryman had made his breakfast. He looked at no one present, and no one now looked at him, even Madame Defarge, who had taken up her knitting and was at work. "Have you finished your repast, my friend?" he asked in due season. "Yes, thank you. Come then, we shall see the apartment that I told you could occupy. It will suit you to a marvel." Out of the wine shop, into the street, and out of the street, into a courtyard, out of the courtyard, up a steep staircase, out of the staircase into a garret, formerly the garret where a white-haired man sat at a low bench, stooping forward and very busy making shoes. No white-haired man was there now, but the three men were there who had gone out of the wine shop singly, and between them and the white-haired man afar off was one small link, that they had once looked in at him through the chinks in the wall. Defarge closed the door carefully and spoke in a subdued voice. "Jacques 1, Jacques 2, Jacques 3. This is the witness encountered by appointment by me, Jacques 4. He will tell you all. Speak, Jacques 5. The mender of roads, blue cap in hand, wiped his swarthy forehead with it and said, "Where shall I commence, monsieur?" "Commence," was Monsieur Defarge's not unreasonable reply, "at the commencement." "I saw him then, messieurs," began the mender of roads, "a year ago this running summer, underneath the carriage of the Marquis, hanging by a chain. Behold the manner of it. I leave my work on the road, the sun going to bed, the carriage of the Marquis slowly ascending the hill, hanging by the chain, like this." Again the mender of roads went through the old performance, in which he ought to have been perfect by that time, seeing that it had been the infallible resource and indispensable entertainment of his village during a whole year. Jacques 1 struck in and asked if he had seen the man before. "Never," answered the mender of roads, recovering his perpendicular. Jacques 3 demanded how he afterwards recognized him then. "By his tall figure," said the mender of roads softly, with his finger at his nose. "When Monsieur the Marquis demands that evening, 'Say, what is he like?' I make response, 'Tall as a spectre.'" "You should have said, 'Short as a dwarf,'" returned Jacques 2. "But what did I know? The deed was not then accomplished, neither did he confide in me. Observe, under those circumstances, even I do not offer my testimony. Monsieur the Marquis indicates me with his finger standing near our little fountain, and says, 'To me, bring the rascal. My faith, messieurs, I offer nothing.'" "He is right there, Jacques," murmured Defarge, to him who had interrupted. "Go on." "Good," said the mender of roads, with an air of mystery. "The tall man is lost, and he is sought. How many months? 9, 10, 11? No matter the number," said Defarge. "He is well hidden, but at last he is unlucky found. Go on." "I am again at work upon the hillside, and the sun is again about to go to bed. I am collecting my tools to descend to my cottage down in the village below, where it is already dark, when I raise my eyes and see coming over the hill 6 soldiers. In the midst of them is a tall man with his arms bound, tied to his sides like this." With the aid of his indispensable cap, he represented a man with elbows bound fast at his hips, with cords that were knotted behind him. "I stand aside, messieurs, by my heap of stones, to see the soldiers and their prisoner pass, for it is a solitary road where any spectacle is well worth looking at. And at first, as they approach, I see no more than they are 6 soldiers with a tall man bound, and that they are almost black to my sight, except on the side of the sun going to bed, where they have a red edge, messieurs. Also I see that their long shadows are on the hollow ridge on the opposite side of the road, and are on the hill above it, and are like the shadows of giants. Also I see that they are covered with dust, and that the dust moves with them as they come, tramp, tramp. But when they advance quite near me, I recognize the tall man, and he recognizes me. Ah, but he would be well content to precipitate himself over the hill side once again, as on the evening when he and I first encountered close to the same spot." He described it as if he were there, and it was evident that he saw it vividly. Perhaps he had not seen much in his life. I do not show the soldiers that I recognize the tall man. He does not show the soldiers that he recognizes me. We do it, and we know it with our eyes. Come on, says the chief of that company, pointing to the village. Bring him fast to his tomb, and they bring him faster. I follow. His arms are swelled because of being bound so tight. His wooden shoes are large and clumsy, and he is lame because he is lame, and consequently slow. They drive him with their guns like this.